What's up? Today we're gonna cover the best opening for white, especially if you're rated below 1600. This opening is aggressive and universal, meaning that you don't have to know the rule opus, Italian game and whatnot, but just this single opening alone. It comes off the first king's pawn move, pawn to e4, and as your opponent responds, as they usually do, pawn to e5, you continue in a standard way, knight f3, attacking the pawn, and after black defends it, instead of developing their bishop, which is the most common move, you play d4. Pretending like you're about to play the Scotch game, but in fact you've got something else in your mind. So first you're attacking this pawn, plus you're threatening to push forward with d5 and to chase away this knight from c6, and therefore in the vast majority of the cases they're going to take this pawn. And here is the catch: instead of recapturing immediately, you're going to pursue quick development and attack by playing in a gambit style, and you're going to offer one more pawn here by playing pawn to c3. This is called a Goring Gambit. Now, the nice thing about this is that for the most part your opponents will know nothing about this, and therefore after watching this video, regardless of how many variations or ideas you remember, you will be way ahead of your opponents who know nothing about it for the most part. Now, after c3, your intent is pretty clear. You want to regain your pawn back, plus build your beautiful pawns in the center of the board. Therefore, once again, the most natural move for black to play, and the only really challenging move potentially is to accept the gambit, because then they at least have an extra pawn so that they can possibly claim an advantage if they succeed in shutting down your attack, which is certainly not that easy. I actually recorded a video about this way ago, and I got a lot of good positive feedback from you guys about you crushing it with this opening, but also I received a couple of questions, so I want to cover them today just as well, so that we'll have an improved and revised version of that older video. So overall, what's the idea of the Goring Gambit? Well, for the price of one pawn, you are ahead in development. You have a lot of open diagonals for your pieces, for your bishop to come here and to possibly target black's king. Also for the other bishop to jump out and start putting pressure. Even your queen has a lot of maneuvers, to be brought out and to start targeting black in the future. All in all, you have free development and lots of ways to develop quick attack. It's certainly not easy for black to figure out what to do here. Now, what can they try doing? Well, in most cases, they'll try to develop either the knight or the bishop and then to castle, so that's what they'll usually do. Now, if they try to develop a knight right away, there is a problem here that you can always push this pawn forward and attack it, and it's somewhat uncomfortable. We're going to talk about that in a second, but for now, let's see a more solid way, which very often your opponents will use, is a move pawn to d6, where they want to stop you from pushing the pawn forward and then develop their knight to f6 without any danger, as they hope. It's not true. So after that, what you're going to do is you're going to play bishop c4. You're going to bring the bishop right here in pretty much all the variations, which is nice because your moves are always the same. So you bring the bishop out, you castle kingside, and very often you will target this square on f-zone one way or the other. So you can do this with jumping out with your queen, a very common idea, from queen to b3, sometimes maybe with a knight to g5, similar to the fried liver attack. So that's one of the most common ideas for you to initiate your attack. Now, one of the questions that a lot of you guys have asked me is, what if black plays bishop g4? Indeed, that's the move that lots of amateurs love so much. They think that if they pin your knight down to the queen, that's going to create some problems for you. You won't be able to jump out with the knight and so forth. But bishop g4 actually is wrong. It's wrong for the reason that you can play queen b3, which is one of the standard attacking moves for you anyway, but because their bishop is not on c8 anymore and is no longer defending this pawn on b7, actually the queen b3 move contains a dual threat of either taking with the bishop this pawn on f7 or taking with your queen this pawn on b7 and attacking the knight. Therefore, bishop g4 was a mistake and now black has to pay the price. By the way, if they say, I don't care, I want to pursue with my thing, I want to take there and ruin your pawn structure, that really backfires pretty badly. Because after that, you just take bishop takes f7, check to the king, and after the king moves, that's the game over, queen to e6. Even if black doesn't fall for this trap, their position is quite difficult anyway. They still have to deal with this bishop takes f7 threat. So what do? Well, let's say they move their queen here, because that looks like perhaps the only normal way to do that. Now you can add more fire to your attack by playing knight to g5. We said that it's also one of the standard ways to put more pressure to this pawn. Now what do now? I mean, they can't really move the pawn because that'll weaken just way too many squares and you can still attack black along this diagonal. How about knight to e5, where they try to defend the pawn plus put pressure on your bishop? Well, then you may just remember that besides putting pressure here, we have also attacked this pawn on b7, right? So we can just go ahead and gobble up this pawn and attack the rook. So if the rook moves, there's a little nice combo that you can use to finish the game off in style. Starts off with knight takes f7, where you attack the rook and you aim to capture it, but your opponent thinks, hey, I can just go ahead and grab the knight. But then you play bishop to b5, and this sneaky move wins the game. Because of this pin, they have to lose the queen. I mean, they can play c6, but that doesn't change anything anyway. So in the next move, you're going to win the queen, plus continue your attack. So Black tried to play a little bit aggressively, but it backfired really badly for them. As we can see, the Goring Gambit is not a boring gambit. There is a lot of exciting stuff here. All right, let's go over the variations once again. Let's see what else can your opponent try against you. So let's say he still goes d6 so that you can play e5 and kick away his knight as it comes out. So let's say d6, you bring your bishop out to this active diagonal. And let's say your opponent realizes that there is a lot of danger coming from this bishop, and he wants to just play bishop e6 and to trade it off. What are you going to do then? Well, guess what? Pretty much the same thing. So we trade here on e6, now he's got this weak pawn, and we still jump out with our queen to b3, the standard move, once again taking aim at these two weak pawns. And it's quite annoying. The only way for them to defend them both is to play a bit awkward move queen to c8, but at least he holds on to these two pawns. Now, how do you develop your attack then? Again, with the standard move knight to g5, putting one more attack to this weakness on e6. He can't just move it forward, that would allow your queen to go there and to start attacking everything there. So that's not an option for Black. How else could Black defend this pawn on e6? Well, the most common move by Black is knight to d4, where he tries to defend the pawn and counter your attack, your queen. In this case, there is one more very common tactical idea that works across lots of different variations. It's the move queen to a4. This is an attack to the king and to the knight, which kind of makes this move knight d4 being completely useless. And in this particular case, we moved to a4 from b3, right? We made it just one square off. But quite often your queen is still on d1, but you can still jump out to a4 and deliver these nasty attacks, which is unexpected by your opponent. Now, queen a4 makes this move knight d4 useless because Black has to come back in order to save their knight so that it can be captured. And after that, how do you continue your attack then? Well, the line that I love the most is a nightmare variation, where you go knight to b5 and you harass your opponent with your knights. At first, it may not be clear what your idea here is. So lots of your opponents are clueless, and they're trying to chase away one of your knights with either a6 or h6. Both of the moves lose in a spectacular fashion. If h6, it's quite funny because they actually push you to play the move which you were going to play anyway, that's your main threat, knight takes e6. It's a sack of the knight, and I mean, he has to do something about this because you threaten knight takes c7. Now it's attacked by both knights. If he captures the knight, that's a royal fork to the king and the queen. That's you're gonna win the queen on the next move, plus his king is still deadly exposed. You're gonna attack it and win. Alright, what if your opponent instead of h6 goes a6? Guess what? It's all the same stuff. You still say, hey, it's nighttime, and you play knight takes c6. You still sacrifice the knight in the very same fashion. We know that queen takes c6 loses to this royal fork, knight takes c7. What if he takes this knight? Well, then the fork comes from the other angle. You win with the left hook. Queen takes a8, attacking here everything, and after queen recaptures, knight to c7, the other fork. This time we're getting back our queen, and as a result of this line, you won the exchange. This rook on a8, you're also some pawns up, I guess. Yeah, you're also a pawn up, and the knight in the corner, but it can escape from there very conveniently by playing knight b6, delivering check to the king, and then jumping back to d5, so the position is clearly winning for white. Alright, finally, what if your opponent does not develop this bishop at all to either square, but just plays another standard move, knight to f6? And he aims to simply play bishop e7, castle, and he hopes for an easy retirement after that. What do you do then? Well, you disrupt his plans by playing queen to b3. It's still all the same attacking pattern. By the way, if you don't remember all these variations, which I certainly don't expect and you don't have to, you can just remember these common attacking patterns. And that is enough, because you don't have to know this opening better than Magnus Carlsen. It's enough to know it a little bit better than your opponents in order to win. So queen b3 attacks the pawn, and here the most played move by Black is a common error, queen to e7. It's really not easy to figure out why this move is wrong, but after you play bishop g5, your opponent will start scratching his head, figuring out what to do. He'll start to realize that something goes very wrong here, but by now you know that you already won the game. So your opponent is still trying to figure out what's going on, but you know that it's over. Now, what's the problem? The problem by Black is that he kind of can't move at all, he's completely paralyzed. Just think about this. The bishop can't come out because of this queen on e7. Now, this knight on f6 is pinned, can't move. The knight from c6, if they ever try to go knight a5 and attack you, we already know that we've got a common move, queen a4, sometimes queen b5 as well, which targets both the king and the knight, making these threats just pointless. It doesn't do anything. Also, their bishop from c8 is tied down to the defense of this pawn, so it can't go away. If so, you'll grab the pawn, you'll attack the rook as well as the knight, so this bishop can't move either. And you just can see that black just completely paralyzed. There's nothing he can do. He just doesn't know about it yet. If he goes h6, no problem, you can trade it off, and then you castle. Fundamentally, nothing changes, black still can't move. And your plan at some point is to play rook e1 and break open the e-file, and get to his king. If he goes bishop e7, you've got another standard thing, knight jumps here to d5, attacking everything. If the queen moves, then you take here, attack the king, you grab the rook, plus you continue attacking his king, and it's a complete devastation of black. There's one more thing that your opponents will often play against you, is to move bishop to b4 in this position. So far we covered, just to remind you, the pawn to d6 move, trying to be more modest. But now what about bishop to b4? They love to play this move because it develops a bishop, thus getting them one step closer to castling. Plus they're ready to trade off your knight, therefore reducing material, making it harder for you to attack. You still play all the same stuff, bishop to c4. Now your pawns will usually take here on c3, thinking that they disrupted your pawns, they're weak, they play knight f6, now they hope to castle, and your opponent is dancing boogie woogie, thinks that he's a pawn up, your pawns are weak, he's gonna play d6, castle, life's good. But as always, you disrupt his plans. As soon as he goes knight f6, you always want to consider the move pawn to e5. Just attacking this knight. And it's uncomfortable for black to move this knight actually, because what can he do? If the knight goes back, undeveloped in it, it's kind of looks like he's about to resign, right? Move the other knight back on the next move and set it up for the next game. So instead of he tries going forward knight e4, you can see that this knight is kind of hanging here. It's distant from the rest of his pieces, and you can attack it with something like queen to d5 with a double attack again, along this diagonal as well as to this knight. He's going to lose the knight on the next move. Therefore, knight to e4 does not work for black. What else can he try? Some of your opponents will try to outsmart you and play queen e7, saying, hey, I'm going to pin your pawn down to the king and I'm going to win it. It's pretty much always a bad idea for black, because in reality their king is standing there, and therefore opening the e-file just backfires. You can simply castle, letting them capture this pawn because it's still attacking the knight, and as soon as they do that, they actually expose themselves to the attack along the e-file. Just play rook e1, and there's nothing black can do to stop this attack. I mean, in this particular position they can cover with the knight, but still they'll at least lose the knight here on e4, so you'll still get a winning position. Finally, some of your opponents will wish to play here knight to g4, aiming to attack this pawn twice. There is a common tactical motif here which you can use. You've got your queen from here that x-rays the knight, and you can make use of that by playing bishop takes f7. You see that quite often we either attack the square on f7 or we actually sack our bishop right there, because it's the weakest point of black's position and it's the door to your opponent's monarch. Now, after king comes out, you then follow up with knight to g5, check to the king, and plus we open up this diagonal so that on the next move we can get our piece back and keep attacking his exposed king. Quite often, funnily enough, they try to hide their king into the corner of the board by playing king to g8, and they expect you to capture this knight, which would be perfectly fine for white, but in this case there is a much more straightforward way to win. Queen to d5, and not king to d5, that would be too much, like queen to d5 check, and that's just checkmate in one. On the next move, queen to f7, boom, game over. Alrighty, so your opponent has just played bishop to b4, we respond as usual, bishop to c4, he trades off your knight, hoping that it's going to make his life easier, which is not the case, and after that, what can he do? As we know, if he tries knight f6, we always push forward with e5, we chase this knight away, and wherever it goes, there is always some trouble. If your opponent tries to stop you from pushing your pawn forward and goes d6, then you always have this annoying move queen to b3, and somehow there's not a convenient way for black to easily defend this pawn, and you always have some initiative. Now, some of your opponents will try to play safe and will go knight to e7. Now, it looks like it's a perfect solution. They're getting ready to castle, plus there is no e5 which would target this knight on f6. But in fact, it's not the case. This way, we start with knight to g5 using something similar to the fried liver attack. And as he castles, thinking that now he's finally safe, the truth is exactly the opposite. This is exactly time for him to resign after queen to h5. It turns out that there is a drawback of putting the knight on e7, not on f6. It does not defend his kingside anymore. And so with queen h5, you threaten queen takes h7 checkmate in one, plus you put a lot of pressure to this pawn on f7. And overall, just with the amount of arrows that are drawn here, you can see that you overpower your opponent. But first off, they gotta stop this from coming, so they gotta play pawn h6. But then you can grab this pawn and attack the queen. If they want to hold on to the material, then they have to move the queen. But then, thanks to this bishop, you can have all kinds of discovered checks with knight to d6, or even better, knight takes h6, which is a discovered check and a double check, which forces the king to move. And after it goes, you can once again like knight to f7, delivering the double check and a discovered check. So quite funny. And after king goes there, now you open this file so you can actually play queen to h8 checkmate. If you have questions about any potential moves that your opponent can try, I've got another video where I cover those additional options. You can check it out right here, and that'll make your understanding of the Goring Gambit just to the moon. And finally, if you want to improve your attacking skills overall so that you can find those brilliant shots without the need to memorize the lines, check out this free masterclass and keep crushing it.